He was a man who built his empire by looking down on the world from the top of his gleaming skyscrapers. She was a woman just trying to keep her footing on the ground for the new life growing inside her. On a rain-slicked Tuesday night in the heart of the city, their two worlds collided over a table set with crystal and silver. The bill came to 857 to 34s. For him, it was less than pocket change. For her, it was a catastrophe. But he didn't pay with money. He paid with contempt, walking out and leaving her to face the consequences. He thought he was free. He didn't realize she was about to send him a bill that would cost him more than his fortune. It would cost him his carefully constructed reality. The ache in Marlo Beckett's lower back was a familiar, persistent companion. At 7 months pregnant, it was one of the many small discomforts she'd learned to accommodate, like the slight swell of her ankles, or the way she had to navigate the narrow spaces between tables at the Gilded Spoon with a new careful precision. The restaurant was an oasis of quiet luxury in the city's bustling financial district, a place of hushed conversations, clinking glasses, and the soft glow of ridiculously expensive Art Deco lamps. For Marlo, it was simply the place that paid her rent and hopefully would build a small nest egg for the baby, her daughter. The doctor had said it was a girl. Marlo would often find herself pressing a hand to the firm swell of her belly, a secret smile touching her lips, as she felt a faint flutter from within. It was a promise of a future beyond stained tablecloths and demanding patrons. That promise was what kept her going through the grueling 10-hour shifts her art degree collecting dust in a portfolio under her bed. Tuesday nights were usually slow, a gentle lull between the weekend rush and the midweek corporate warriors, but tonight was different. A last-minute reservation had come in for 2, under a name that caused a ripple of excitement among the staff Brent and Fordham. Even Marlo, who tried to stay clear of celebrity gossip, knew the name. Fordham Developments was a titan in the city's real estate scene. His face, chiseled and severe, was plastered on magazines and news sites, usually accompanied by headlines like "The Man Reshaping the Skyline" or "Fordham's Midas Touch." He was, by all accounts, a king in the city. He was determined to conquer one glass tower at a time. When he walked in, the ambient chatter of the restaurant seemed to dip by a few decibels. He was exactly as he appeared in his photos, tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Marlo's car, and radiating an aura of impatient authority. The woman on his arm was a willowy blonde, draped in a silk dress, her laughter sounding, practiced and a little too loud. "Fordham party of 2, he said to the hostess, not as a statement, but as a command. He didn't wait to be led. He simply surveyed the room, selected the best corner booth with a panoramic view of the rain-streaked city lights, and strode toward it. The section belonged to an older waiter, Paul, but the manager, Mr. Saletti, a kind but stressed man with a perpetually furrowed brow, intercepted Marlo. "Beckett, you take this one?" he murmured, his eyes flicking towards her pregnant belly. "The corner booth is roomier. Just be sharp." Marlo understood the unspoken message. This is a big tip. We need this to go perfectly. She pasted on her professional smile, grabbed 2 menus, and approached the table. "Good evening, and welcome to the Gilded Spoon. My name is Marlo, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with some water, perhaps a drink from the bar?" Brenton Fordham didn't even look at her. He was scrolling through his phone, one thumb, moving with ruthless efficiency. Voss still. 2 glasses, and bring the wine list. His date, whose name he hadn't bothered to offer, smiled a brittle smile at Marlo. "And a Cosmo for me, please." The next hour was a masterclass in casual disdain. Fordham treated Marlo not as a person, but as a function. He snapped his fingers to get her attention. He sent back the first bottle of wine, a 400 Chateau Margaux, claiming it was corked, though Marlo suspected he just enjoyed the act of rejection. When she brought the replacement, he tasted it and gave a curt nod, not to her, but to the table, as if it had materialized on its own. He and his companion ordered lavishly oysters, seared foie gras, wagyu steaks, a decadent chocolate lava cake, and multiple glasses of top-shelf scotch. Marlo remained polite and efficient, her smile never faltering even as the ache in her back intensified and her feet began to throb. She refilled his water glass without being asked. She cleared plates the moment they were finished. She was a ghost, an invisible mechanism ensuring his evening was seamless. Through it all, she caught snippets of his conversation. It was a monologue of conquest. He spoke of crushing a competitor, of forcing the city council's hand on a new zoning variance of a hostile takeover he was planning. His date listened, interjecting with wide-eyed admiration. He was a shark, and the entire world was his ocean. Finally, the feast was over. Marlo approached the table, her stomach tightening with a familiar mix of hope and anxiety that came with delivering a large check. A good tip on a bill this size could mean she could finally buy the new crib she'd been eyeing, instead of a second-hand one. "Will there be anything else for you this evening?" she asked, her voice warm. Fordham finally looked at her, his blue eyes as cold and clear as ice. It was the first time he'd made direct eye contact all night, and it felt less like acknowledgement and more like an assessment. His gaze flickered for a fraction of a second to her swollen abdomen. A flicker of something unreadable annoyance disgust crossed his features before being smoothed away. "Just the check," he said, his tone clipped. Marlo retrieved the leather billfold from the point-of-sale system. The total stared back at her, $857 to 34. She took a deep breath, placed it discreetly on the table, and said, "Thank you. Take your time." She retreated to a nearby station, folding napkins and trying to look busy, giving them their space. She saw Fordham open the billfold. He glanced at it for no more than a second, then closed it. He said something to his date, who laughed and stood up, smoothing her dress. Fordham rose with her shrugging on his coat. This was the moment. He'd leave a card or a stack of cash. Marlo watched her heart thumping. And then it happened. Fordham's phone rang. He answered it, turning his back to the table. "Yes. What is it?" "No, that's unacceptable. Tell them I'll be there in 20. He started walking toward the door, still deep in his phone call. His date followed, casting a quick look back at the table, a brief confused frown on her face before she scurried to catch up. Marlo waited. Maybe he was just taking the call outside. Maybe he'd told his date to pay. But the woman was already out the door, getting into a waiting black town car, and Fordham was right behind her, climbing in without a backward glance. The car pulled seamlessly into the rain-slicked traffic and disappeared. The leather billfold sat on the table, stark and solitary. A cold dread heavier than any physical exhaustion washed over Marlo. No, he couldn't have. Not a man like that? It had to be a mistake, an oversight. She walked slowly to the table, her legs feeling like lead. Her hand trembled as she reached for the billfold. She opened it. It was empty. No cash, no card, nothing. The blood drained from her face. $857.34. The restaurant's policy was strict, a brutal industry standard designed to prevent staff collusion. If a table walked out on your watch, the bill came out of your pocket. It wasn't always enforced for small tabs, but for a bill this size. Paul, the older waiter, came over, his face etched with concern. "What's wrong, kid?" Marlo couldn't speak. She just held up the empty billfold. Paul swore under his breath. "The great Brenton Fordham. You've got to be kidding me." Mr. Saletti came rushing over, his face paling as he understood the situation. He looked from the empty billfold to Marlo's stricken face. He just left." Marlo whispered the words, catching in her throat. He was on the phone. "I thought he was coming back." Mr. Saletti sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. He ran a hand over his bald head. "I saw. Marlo, You know the policy. But Mr. Saletti, it's almost $900. That's my rent. That's 2 weeks of pay for me." Panic was starting to bubble in her chest, hot and acidic. "It's Brenton Fordham. He's a billionaire. It has to be a mistake." "I hope it is," Mr. Saletti said, his voice softer now, but his eyes full of grim reality. "But the house can't absorb that. We'll call his office in the morning. Maybe his assistant can clear it up. But for tonight, I have to take it out of your declared tips. We can spread it out over a few paychecks, but Marlo, it has to be covered." The air rushed out of Marlo's lungs. Spreading it out didn't matter. It was a hole she couldn't afford. It was the crib she couldn't buy. It was the extra savings from maternity leave gone. It was the gnawing anxiety of bringing a child into a world where she was already so far behind. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging. She fought them back, her pride, a stubborn, ragged fortress. She wouldn't cry in the middle of the dining room. She looked out the window at the gleaming city skyline, at the tallest, most audacious tower of them all, Fordham Tower, its beacon flashing in the rain. He was up there somewhere in his penthouse castle, having already forgotten the meal, the restaurant, and the invisible pregnant girl who had served him. He had dined, he had dashed, and he had left her with a debt that felt like a crushing weight on her already weary shoulders. But as the initial shock gave way to a slow, burning anger, a different thought began to form in Marlowe's mind. He had left her with the bill, and one way or another, she was going to make sure he paid it. The subway ride home was a blur of fluorescent lights and screeching wheels, each jolt a fresh reminder of the cavernous hole in her finances. Marlowe lived in a small third-floor walk-up in a neighborhood far from the glittering spires of the financial district. Her apartment was modest, but it was clean, and she and her roommate Olivia had made it a home. Olivia, a sharp-witted paralegal with an intolerance for injustice, was waiting up. She took one look at Marlowe's pale, tear-streaked face, and her usual sarcastic demeanor melted away. Whoa, what happened? Did someone finally complain about the price of the artisan bread basket? Marlowe collapsed onto the worn floral sofa, the story tumbling out of her in a torrent of disbelief and anger. The name, the arrogance, the deliberate act of walking out the crushing bill. Olivia's expression hardened. Brenton Fordham, the real estate ghoul. Are you kidding me? He didn't forget Marlowe. Guys like that don't forget. It's a power trip. He did it because he could. She started pacing the small living room, her mind already whirring. Okay, we fight this. We call the labor board. We call his office first thing in the morning and raise hell. Mr. Saletti already said he'd call. Marlowe said, her voice muffled by a cushion. But what if they just deny it? Say he paid in cash and I pocketed it. It's my word against Brenton Fordham's. Then we make a stink, Olivia insisted. We go to the press. Marlowe shook her head, a fresh wave of despair washing over her. And say what billionaire forgot to pay for his steak. They'll laugh me out of the room. I'll look like a pathetic, greedy opportunist. He'll have his army of lawyers and PR people bury me in a day. Defeated, she went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, her hand resting on her belly, where her daughter was now kicking up a storm, as if sensing her mother's distress. The injustice of it all churned in her gut. It wasn't just the money, it was the humiliation, the complete and utter disregard. He hadn't seen a person, he had seen a convenience, and when he was done with it, he had simply discarded it. At 3 a.m., she got up. She walked into the small nook of the living room that served as her art space. Dust covers draped a large easel and stacks of canvases. She hadn't truly painted in almost a year. The demands of her job and the exhaustion of her pregnancy had stolen her creative energy. But now, fueled by a potent cocktail of insomnia and indignation, an idea began to take shape. Olivia wanted to fight him with lawyers and press releases. That was his world, his battlefield. He would win there. But Marlowe had a different weapon. She pulled out a sheet of thick cream-colored watercolor paper, the kind she used for her best commission work back in college. She found her calligraphy pens and her finest inks. If Brenton Fordham wanted a bill, she would give him one, a proper one. For the next 2 hours, she worked with a focused intensity she hadn't felt in months. Her hand, usually so steady, trembled slightly at first, but soon found its rhythm. This wasn't just a demand for money. It was an act of defiance, a piece of performance art for an audience of one. She began by calligraphing the header in elegant flowing script, invoice rendered to Mr. Brenton Fordham, Fordham Tower, from Marlowe Beckett, the human being who served you. Dinner below that she began to itemize. Item 1, culinary delights and libations. Chateau Margaux, 2015, seared foie gras, dry-aged wagyu, X2, etc. Cost $857.34. She paused, then dipped her pen again. Item 2, emotional distress surcharge, applied for the act of public humiliation and the subsequent inducement of panic in a pregnant woman, potentially hazardous to both maternal and fetal health. Cost $500. Iuaro. Item 3, dignity restoration fee. A nominal charge for being treated as an invisible, non-sentient piece of restaurant equipment for a period of approximately 97 minutes. Cost, $1,000. Item 4, inconvenience and lost seated time compensation. Projected wages lost due to the time required to work off a debt, incurred by a man who uses 100 bills as bookmarks. Cost, $857.34. She drew a firm straight line beneath the figures. Then, in bold, stark lettering, she wrote the final tally. Total amount. Due. 3/2/14/68. At the bottom, she added a small, meticulously drawn sketch. It was a simple line drawing of a pregnant woman's silhouette, one hand holding a serving tray, the other resting protectively on her belly. When the sun began to stream through the window, Marlo was exhausted but exhilarated. She showed the invoice to Olivia, who was making coffee. Olivia's jaw dropped. She read it once then, twice, a slow, wolfish grin spreading across her face. Marlo, this is brilliant. This is a masterpiece. This is so much better than a lawyer's letter. I'm going to deliver it to him, Marlo said, her voice firm with new resolve. In person. That afternoon, after a restless attempt at sleep, Marlo put on her most professional-looking maternity dress, slid the stiff paper invoice into a large manila envelope, and took the subway downtown. Standing at the foot of Fordham Tower was like standing at the base of a mountain of glass and steel. It was designed to make people feel small, and it succeeded. The lobby was a cavern of marble and polished chrome, manned by security guards with jawlines as sharp as their suit creases. Marlo approached the main reception desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. I'm here to see Brenton Fordham, she said, her voice impressively steady. I have a personal delivery for him. The receptionist, a woman with a headset and a bored expression, didn't even look up from her screen. Does he have an appointment with a Marlo Beckett? No, but Mr. Fordham does not accept unscheduled appointments or unsolicited deliveries. You can leave it with security, and if it's deemed important, it will be passed to his executive assistant. Marlo knew that leave it with security meant it would end up in a shredder. It's a confidential financial document. It needs to be delivered to him personally. The receptionist finally looked at her, her eyes giving Marlo a dismissive once-over, lingering for a moment on her belly. That won't be possible. It was a full stop. A door slammed in her face. Dejected, Marlo retreated to a coffee shop across the street. She watched the entrance to the tower, the endless parade of men and women in power suits striding in and out. She was invisible to them, a world away. She was about to give up when Olivia's words from the morning echoed in her head. Guys, like that, don't forget. It's a power trip. He had a routine. Olivia, the paralegal sleuth, had done a quick search that morning. Every Wednesday, Fordham held a power lunch at a rival upscale restaurant, Veritas, just 3 blocks away. It was a public ritual, a way of being seen, of marking his territory. It was Wednesday. It was 12:45 p.m. A new plan, audacious and terrifying, bloomed in Marlo's mind. She clutched the envelope and walked the 3 blocks to Veritas. It was even more opulent than the Gilded Spoon. Peering through the window, she saw him. He was seated at a large central table, holding court with 3 other men in expensive suits. He was laughing, a broad, predatory smile on his face. Taking a breath that did little to calm her racing heart, Marlo walked in. The maitre d' moved to intercept her, his expression disapproving. Can I help you, madam? I'm just delivering something. She said, her voice low but firm, and before he could stop her, she was walking across the plush carpet directly toward Fordham's table. The laughter at the table died as she approached. The 3 other men looked at her confused. Brenton Fordham looked up, his smile vanishing. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, followed by a thunderous scowl. What is this? He demanded, his voice a low growl. Marlo didn't flinch. She met his icy gaze and calmly placed the manila envelope on the table next to his plate of seared scallops. You left this at the Gilded Spoon last night, she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying across the now silent restaurant. I believe it's your bill. I've taken the liberty of preparing an updated version for you. A dark flush crept up Fordham's neck. His companions stared, their forks frozen mid-air. He snatched the envelope, ripped it open, and pulled out the invoice. His eyes scanned the elegant script, the itemized charges, the final, audacious total. He saw the drawing at the bottom. For a moment, he was utterly still. The silence stretched thick with tension. Then, with a sudden violent motion, he tore the beautifully crafted invoice in half, then in half. Again the sound of ripping paper, like a gunshot in the quiet room. He threw the pieces onto the floor. Get out, he hissed, his voice trembling with barely controlled fury. Get out of here before I have you arrested for harassment. Marlo looked at him then, at the scattered pieces of her artwork on the floor. She hadn't expected him to pay. She had expected this. The rage, the humiliation, and she had her answer. This was no mistake. It was a feature, not a bug, of being Brenton Fordham. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the restaurant, her head held high. She didn't see the curious and judgmental stares of the other patrons. She didn't see the shocked looks on the faces of Fordham's lunch companions. She only felt the fierce, defiant thrum of her own heart. He had torn up her bill, but this was far from over. He had just escalated the war, and Marlo was beginning to realize she had more allies than she thought. The whole city was watching. The walk back to the subway was fueled by pure adrenaline. The public confrontation had been terrifying, but Fordham's explosive reaction had erased any lingering doubt Marlo might have had about his intentions. He wasn't just a thoughtless jerk. He was a bully who believed his wealth made him immune to consequences. The image of him tearing up her carefully penned invoice, his face contorted with rage, was seared into her mind. It wasn't just paper he was tearing. It was her dignity, her plea to be seen as a person. When she got back to the apartment and told Olivia what had happened, her roommate's reaction was a mixture of awe and fury. "You confronted him? In the middle of Veritas, Marlo, you have more guts than a platoon of Marines," Olivia said, grabbing her laptop. "But him tearing it up and threatening you. Oh, that's it. The gloves are off. He just declared war, and he has no idea who he's messing with." What good did it do? Liv Marlo sank onto the couch, the adrenaline fading into exhaustion. He tore it up. He threatened me. Now, I'm just the crazy pregnant lady who accosted him at lunch. No. Olivia said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Now you're the woman who stood up to him. And he didn't just threaten you, he threatened you in a room full of witnesses. That's his mistake. Olivia's initial plan to contact the labor board now seemed quaint. This was bigger. This was a story. And Olivia knew just who to give it to. Her search history was filled with articles by a local investigative journalist and blogger named Natalie Shaw. Shaw ran a popular independent news site called The City Beat, known for its deep dives into corporate malfeasance and its championing of the underdog. She had a reputation for being tenacious, thorough, and utterly unafraid of powerful people. She had taken on slumlords, corrupt politicians, and corporate polluters. A story about an arrogant billionaire stiffing a pregnant waitress was right up her alley. "We're sending this to Natalie Shaw," Olivia declared. "We'll give her everything. The original bill, the story of what happened at Veritas, the torn pieces of your invoice if you have them." Marlo had on instinct bent down and collected the shredded remnants of her invoice before leaving the restaurant. She had tucked them into her purse, a tattered symbol of his contempt. They drafted an email to Natalie Shaw laying out the entire story in clear, concise detail. They attached a photo of the original restaurant bill and a picture of the reassembled pieces of Marlo's artistic invoice like a completed puzzle. They hit send and waited, a nervous energy crackling in the small apartment. The reply came less than an hour later. It was brief and to the point. "Ms. Beckett, I'd like to meet with you. Can you be at my office in an hour? N. Shaw." Natalie Shaw's office was the polar opposite of Fordham Tower. It was a cluttered, chaotic space above a bookstore, smelling of old paper, strong coffee, and determination. Natalie herself was a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes, an unruly mess of dark hair, and a direct, no-nonsense manner. She listened to Marlo's story without interruption, her expression unreadable. She studied the photos, her eyes lingering on the itemized dignity restoration fee. When Marlo finished, Natalie leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful look on her face. "He threatened to have you arrested for harassment," she asked. "Yes," Marlo confirmed, her voice quiet. "Good?" Natalie said, a slight smile touching her lips. "That's the hook." Before Marlo even got home, she received a call from Mr. Saletti, her manager. His voice was strained. "Marlo, I just got a call from a lawyer representing Mr. Fordham. He's accusing you of harassment and extortion." Marlo's blood ran cold. "What extortion?" "He's claiming your invoice was an attempt to extort money from him, and that your appearance at Veritas was a calculated move to damage his reputation." His lawyer sent a formal cease and desist letter. "They're demanding a public apology." "An apology from me." Marlo was flabbergasted, and Mr. Saletti's voice dropped. They also mentioned that if the restaurant continues to employ you, we could be seen as complicit in the harassment campaign. They didn't say it outright, Marlowe, but they were threatening a lawsuit. The phone felt heavy in Marlowe's hand. He wasn't just trying to crush her. He was trying to get her fired. He was trying to take away the very livelihood she was fighting for. The sheer malice of it took her breath away. She relayed the conversation to Natalie Shaw, who simply replied via text, "Even better. Call your manager back. Tell him not to worry and not to do a thing. Tell him my article goes live tomorrow at 6 a.m. The next morning, the city woke up to a new headline dominating its social media feeds. Natalie Shaw's article on the City Beat was an explosive piece of journalistic storytelling. The Billionaire's tab, Fordham stiffs. Pregnant waitress then tries to silence her with legal threats. The article was devastatingly effective. It began with a sympathetic portrait of Marlowe, the art student putting her dreams on, hold the expectant mother working tirelessly to prepare for her child. It then detailed the dinner at the Gilded Spoon, quoting the bill down to the cent. It included a high-resolution image of Marlowe's beautiful, defiant invoice. But the masterstroke was the second half of the article. Natalie had, in just a few hours, found 2 other people who had been at Veritas and were willing to speak anonymously. They corroborated the entire scene, Marlowe's calm demeanor, Fordham's furious outburst, his public threat. The article then pivoted to the cease and desist letter and the veiled threats against the restaurant. Natalie framed the narrative perfectly. This wasn't just about an unpaid bill. It was about a pattern of predatory behavior, of a powerful man using his wealth and legal muscle to bully a vulnerable person into silence. The story went viral. By 9 a.m., and beyond Fordham Dines and Dashes was trending on Twitter. The comment sections on news sites' aggregator were a tidal wave of outrage. People shared the story on Facebook, Instagram, and Reddit. Marlowe's artistic invoice became a symbol of the movement screenshotted and shared thousands of times. An artist on Instagram created a stylized version of it that became a popular meme. The public reaction was visceral and immediate. Fordham had spent millions crafting an image of himself as a brilliant, if ruthless, visionary. In a single morning, Natalie Shaw and Marlowe Beckett had recast him as a cheap, cruel bully. By lunchtime, a small group of protesters had gathered on the sidewalk across from Fordham Tower, holding signs scrawled with messages like, "Pay your bill. Brenton and real men don't steal from pregnant women." The story was picked up by mainstream news outlets who, now covered by Natalie Shaw's initial reporting, felt safe to run with it. Reporters camped outside the Gilded Spoon, hoping for a comment from Mr. Saletti, who wisely followed Natalie's advice and said nothing. Inside Fordham Tower, Brenton Fordham was in a state of apoplectic rage. He was in a crisis meeting with his head of PR, a slick man named Gerald, and his lead counsel, a more measured and thoughtful lawyer named Garrett Price. How did this happen? Fordham roared, throwing a copy of a newspaper with his face on the front page onto the vast mahogany conference table. "How did one pathetic waitress do this to me?" "You did this," Brenton Garrett said, calmly, a rare act of dissent. "I advised you against sending that letter. It was pouring gasoline on a fire. She harassed me. She tried to extort me. She handed you a bill in public. A jury would call that embarrassing, not extortion," Garrett countered. "The letter, the threat against her employer, that's what gave Shaw the ammunition she needed. That's the story. Not the unpaid dinner, but the cover-up. Gerald, the PR man, was sweating. We need to get ahead of this. We release a statement. We paint her as an unstable opportunist. We highlight her financial situation. We suggest she has a history of this. You will do no such thing," Garrett said, his voice sharp. "That will only make it worse. You'll look like you're punching down, which is exactly what you're being accused of." But Fordham wasn't listening to Garrett. He was listening to the rage that clouded his judgment. "Do it," he snarled at Gerald. "Bury her. I don't care what it costs." That afternoon, Fordham Developments released an official statement. It was a disastrous miscalculation. The statement was cold and clinical, accusing Marlowe Beckett of a premeditated shakedown and announcing that they were exploring all legal options against her and any media outlets repeating her defamatory lies. The public backlash was instantaneous and brutal. The hashtag evolved into #Bury Brenton. Donations began pouring into a GoFundMe that Olivia had set up for Marlo, ostensibly for her legal defense and baby fund. It blew past its $5,000 goal in an hour. Marlo watched it all unfold from her apartment, a spectator in her own life story. Her phone buzzed relentlessly with messages of support from friends, former classmates, and complete strangers. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and strangely validating. She had felt so small and invisible in that restaurant. Now, it seemed the entire city could see her. That evening, as she looked at the rapidly climbing total on the GoFundMe page, an idea bolder and more powerful than the first began to form. He had torn up her paper bill. He had dismissed her with a press release. It was time to send him a bill he couldn't tear up, couldn't ignore, and couldn't bury. A bill for the whole city to see. The public relations disaster ignited by Fordham's official statement was more than just a trending topic. It began to have tangible consequences. A prominent city council member, who was a key supporter of Fordham's massive controversial waterfront redevelopment project, publicly announced she was reevaluating her position in light of the disturbing allegations. Two major investors in the project made nervous calls to Garrett Price, demanding to know how the firm was handling its sudden, catastrophic image problem. The brand of Brenton Fordham, once synonymous with power and success, was now tainted with cruelty and pettiness. Fordham, however, remained trapped in his fortress of ego. He saw the escalating crisis not as a result of his actions, but as a conspiracy against him. He saw Marlo Beckett as the malicious architect of his public crucifixion. The more the public rallied around her, the more his fury hardened into a cold, diamond-hard resolve to win, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, Marlo, with Olivia's help, was channeling the groundswell of public support into her next move. The GoFundMe had swelled to an astonishing amount, far more than she needed for any legal defense. People weren't just donating money. They were investing in the story, in the idea of holding a powerful man accountable. "What are you going to do with all this?" Olivia asked, scrolling through the endless stream of supportive comments on the donation page. "I'm not going to keep it," Marlo said immediately. "Most of it anyway. But I am going to use some of it, not for lawyers, for art." Her plan was audacious. Across the street from the main entrance of Fordham Tower stood a massive multi-story digital billboard. It was one of the most coveted advertising spaces in the city, usually displaying ads for luxury cars or Swiss watches. Using the funds from the campaign, Marlo, through a shell company Olivia helped set up to ensure anonymity, rented the billboard for 1 week. She spent the next 48 hours not on legal strategy, but locked in her Art Nook drawing. She didn't want to use words. Words could be twisted. His statement had proven that. She wanted to use images, the most universal language of all. She created a simple, powerful 4-panel animated comic strip. It was her story, distilled into silent, moving art. Panel 1. A stark black and white caricature of Brenton Fordham, drawn with exaggerated features of wealth and gluttony. He sat at a table, a sneer on his face, surrounded by mountains of food and expensive wine. Panel 2. The perspective shifted to show a waitress serving him. She was drawn softly in shades of gray. Her face was weary but gentle, and the swell of her pregnancy was unmistakable. Panel 3. Fordham, now depicted as a shadowy figure, slips away into the darkness, leaving behind an empty table and an unpaid bill. Panel 4. The final lingering image. The waitress stands alone in the empty restaurant, looking down at her empty hands. In the background, a simple, softly lit outline of a baby's crib. The animation was simple, a loop that ran every 2 minutes. At the end of the sequence, a single line of text would appear in Marlo's own elegant script. "Some bills can't be paid with money. Pay your bill." On Friday morning, the billboard lit up. It was a silent, towering rebuke, playing out directly in front of the building that bore his name. Every employee walking into Fordham Tower had to pass it. Every pedestrian on the busy street stopped and stared. News vans, already camped out, swiveled their cameras to capture the stunning visual. The effect was immediate and devastating. The billboard transformed the story from a viral news item into a piece of public theater. It was art as protest, a David and Goliath story, told in pixels 40 feet high. It was inescapable. For Brenton Fordham, looking down from his penthouse office, it was a personal hell projected onto his city. He could see it from his window, a constant silent accusation. He smashed a crystal glass against his wall, showering the Persian rugs with shards. "Turn it off!" he screamed at Garrett over the phone. "Sue them, sue the billboard company. Find out who is behind this and destroy them." "We can't," Garrett said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "It's not libelous. There are no names, just caricatures. It falls under artistic expression and public commentary. Legally, our hands are tied, and Brenton the billboard company is refusing to tell us who rented the space. They're citing client confidentiality." The story of the billboard itself became a new chapter in the saga. Natalie Shaw ran a follow-up piece titled "The Billboard," that roared speculating on the anonymous artist who had so perfectly captured the city's sentiment. Marlowe's identity as the artist remained a secret, which only added to the mystique. She was no longer just the victim. She was a symbol of creative resistance. The pressure on Fordham was now immense. The waterfront project was officially put on hold by the city council. A major charity of which he was a primary benefactor publicly asked him to step down from its board to avoid further distractions. His world was contracting, the walls of his own making closing in on him. It was in this crucible of public shame and private fury that the final unexpected twist emerged. It came, as these things often do, from an anonymous source. An email landed in Natalie Shaw's inbox with the subject line, "The Ghost of Fordham's Past." The sender identified herself as a retired housekeeper who had worked for Brenton's stepfather for over 20 years. She had known Brenton since he was a boy. Her message was simple and contained a piece of information that Brenton Fordham had spent his entire adult life and a considerable amount of money erasing from his official history. Before his mother, Eleanor married the millionaire industrialist Robert Fordham. The email read, "She was Eleanor Vance, and she was a single mother. For the first 7 years of Brenton's life, she raised him alone, working 2 jobs to keep them afloat. One of those jobs was as a waitress at a diner in the Bronx." Natalie Shaw felt a jolt, the kind a journalist gets when all the scattered pieces of a puzzle suddenly snap into place. She spent the next day verifying the information. She found public records, a birth certificate for a Brenton Vance, a marriage license for Eleanor Vance and Robert Fordham, after which Brenton's name was legally changed. She found 2 former co-workers from the old diner now in their 70s who remembered Eleanor vividly. "A hard worker," one said. "Always tired, always talking about giving her boy a better life." This wasn't just a backstory. It was the entire key to understanding Brenton Fordham. His ruthless ambition, his obsession with status, his carefully constructed persona, it was all built on a foundation of shame. His contempt for Marlowe wasn't just the casual cruelty of the rich. It was a deep-seated, violent rejection of his own past. In humiliating Marlowe, he was trying to humiliate the ghost of his own mother, the part of himself he despised. Garrett Price, his lawyer, found out about the new angle when Natalie Shaw called him for a comment before publishing. He felt a sinking feeling in his gut. This was the checkmate. He went to Fordham's penthouse, a place that now felt less like a palace and more like a besieged bunker. He found Brenton staring out the window at the silent, accusing billboard. "They know," Brenton Garrett said quietly. "Natalie Shaw knows about your mother, about the diner." Fordham didn't turn around. His shoulders, usually so straight and imperious, seemed to slump. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the city. "She wanted me to forget," Fordham said, his voice raspy, unfamiliar. "When she married Robert, she said that part of our life was over. A bad dream. We were Fords now. We looked forward, never back." "The story is running tomorrow morning," Garrett said. "It will explain everything. Your anger, your reaction. It will recontextualize the whole thing, but it will also expose the one thing you've kept hidden your entire life." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "There's only one move left to make. Not for the company, not for the investors. For you. You have to get ahead of it. You have to stop fighting her and start facing yourself." Brenton finally turned from the window. The rage was gone from his eyes. In its place was something Garrett had never seen before, a profound, hollow emptiness. The look of a man whose carefully built fortress had just been leveled, leaving him exposed and shivering in the ruins. The The king was naked, and the ghost of a tired waitress from the Bronx had finally caught up with him. Part 5. Paying the Real Bill. The morning Natalie Shaw's third article was published was the morning Brenton Fordham's world finally shattered. The headline was stark and devastating. Fordham's ghost, the secret waitress, mother of the billionaire who stiffed one. The story was a masterwork of investigative empathy. It didn't vilify his mother, it painted a portrait of a woman's fierce struggle and a son's complex shame. It laid bare the psychological engine driving his cruelty. The public narrative shifted instantly. The outrage didn't lessen, but it was now laced with a kind of tragic, pitiful understanding. He was no longer just a monster. He was a man haunted and twisted by his own origins. For Brenton, reading the words felt like an autopsy of his soul. Every ambition, every ruthless decision, every suit of armor he had donned for decades was stripped away, revealing the terrified little boy from the Bronx who was deeply ashamed of his mother's tired feet and the smell of diner grease on her uniform. His attack on Marlowe hadn't been an attack on a stranger at all. It had been an attack on his own memory. The fallout was absolute. He didn't take any calls. He didn't speak to his staff. He just sat in his silent penthouse, the city lights twinkling below the billboard across the street, playing its silent looped indictment. He had lost. He had lost his project, his reputation, his investors' confidence, and now his last secret. He had nothing left to protect. It was Garrett who finally broke the silence. He let himself into the penthouse that evening and found Brenton sitting in the dark. "What do you want?" Garrett Brenton's voice was hollow. "I want to tell you what we're going to do," Garrett said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "First, you are going to transfer $1 million to a trust fund. I'll have it set up by morning. It will be for the education of Marlowe Beckett's child. No strings attached. Second, you will make a $5 million anonymous donation to a citywide charity that supports single mothers and low-income families. Third, you will issue a full unconditional public apology written by you, not by a PR team. And fourth, you're going to ask to meet her. You're going to apologize to her face." Brenton was silent for a long time. "She'll never agree to meet me." "Let me worry about that," Garrett said. Garrett reached out to Natalie Shaw, who in turn reached out to Marlowe. Marlowe was hesitant. The thought of facing him again filled her with a profound sense of dread. But Olivia, ever the pragmatist, convinced her. "You have all the power now, Sarah. You don't have to forgive him. You just have to hear him out. Close the book." The meeting was set for a week later. The location at Marlowe's request was the Gilded Spoon. It was to take place after the restaurant had closed for the night. Mr. Saletti agreed to stay and let them in. When the night came, Marlowe walked into the empty, darkened restaurant. The tables were bare, the chairs stacked. It looked strange and vulnerable without its usual finery. Mr. Saletti gave her a reassuring nod from the bar. Brenton Fordham was already there, standing by the corner booth, where he had sat just weeks before. He wasn't wearing his power suit. He was dressed in simple dark trousers and a cashmere sweater. He looked smaller, diminished. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a deep, weary unease. They stood in silence for a moment, the space between them charged with the weight of everything that had happened. He spoke first, his voice low and unsteady. "Ms. Beckett, Marlowe. Thank you for coming." Marlowe just nodded, her arms crossed protectively over her belly. "There is no excuse for my behavior." He began, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Not my past, not my upbringing, nothing. What I did was cruel and inexcusable. The money. It was never about the money. It was about a deep-seated ugliness in myself that I took out on you. When I looked at you, I saw a part of my own history that I have spent my life trying to destroy. And in trying to hurt that memory, I hurt you, a person who was showing me nothing but professional kindness." He finally lifted his head, and for the first time Marlowe saw something other than ice in his eyes. It was a profound, aching shame. "I humiliated you," he said. "I jeopardized your job. I caused you and your unborn child an incredible amount of stress. I can't undo that. But I am here to tell you that I am deeply, unequivocally sorry." He slid a folder onto the table. "This is a confirmation of a trust fund that has been established for your daughter's education, and a receipt for a donation made in your honor to the City Families Foundation. It's not payment, It's restitution. It's the very least I can do." Marlo looked at the folder, but didn't touch it. She looked at this man, this titan of industry who had been brought to his knees not by a corporate raider or a market crash, but by his own callousness and a waitress who knew how to draw. "The money will help my daughter," she said, her voice clear and strong, "and the charity donation will help a lot of women who are in the same position I was in, the same position your mother was in. So, for their sake, I accept it." She paused, taking a deep breath. "But I want you to know that none of it was ever about the money for me either. It was about the fact that you didn't see me. You didn't see a person. I hope, after all this, you finally do." A single tear traced a path down Brenton Fordham's cheek. "I do," he whispered. "I do." He turned and left the restaurant without another word. Marlo watched him go, feeling not triumph, but a quiet, somber sense of closure. The war was over. Months later, Marlo gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby girl. She named her Hope. The GoFundMe money, combined with a small, prudent withdrawal from the trust, allowed her to do what she'd always dreamed of. She didn't return to the Gilded Spoon. Instead, she rented a small storefront in her neighborhood and opened the Hope Art Studio. She taught painting classes to local kids, many from low-income families, on a pay-what-you-can basis. Her own work, now infused with a new depth and confidence, began to sell in local galleries. Brenton Fordham disappeared from the public eye. He stepped down as CEO of Fordham Developments, handing the reins to Garrett. The waterfront project was eventually revived, but under new leadership, with a focus on community inclusion and affordable housing. He sold his penthouse. The last Natalie Shaw ever heard of him was a quiet rumor that he was volunteering completely anonymously at a food pantry run by the same City Families Foundation he had donated to. The billboard across from Fordham Tower was long gone, replaced by an ad for a new smartphone. But its impact lingered. In the city's collective memory, it remained a powerful symbol of how one person's quiet dignity, amplified by a bit of ink and a lot of courage, could send a bill so large that even a millionaire couldn't afford to ignore it. It was a reminder that the truest debts are never about money, and that sometimes the only way to pay them is to become a different person entirely. From a single act of contempt in a high-end restaurant to a citywide reckoning that unraveled a man's entire identity, this story shows us the incredible power of one voice against injustice. Marlo Beckett wasn't looking for fame or fortune. She was simply asking for her dignity. What she got in return was a chance to hold a mirror up to a powerful man, and in doing so, to the society that enabled him. Her journey reminds us that the most profound bills aren't settled with cash, but with conscience, accountability, and the difficult, painful work of change. It proves that courage, creativity, and the support of a community can truly level any playing field. If Marlo's story of resilience and artistic justice moved, you please help our channel grow by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of hope and accountability. And most importantly, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next real-life drama. What did you think of Marlo's final bill? Let us know in the comments below.